Good day. If you've been touched by cancer, and I'm sure all of you have, either your mother or your father or some relative or some friend and so on, then you must listen to what I have to say here. I've just carried out a study, which I will put on the internet, which looks at the cause of the cancer epidemic which we have at the moment and which began in about 1980s. I've studied this stuff all my life, really. Well, not all my life, but certainly most of my working life. And I come to the conclusion that I came to the conclusion in 1994, 1995, that the cause of the cancer epidemic, which was just beginning then, was the exposure to strontium-90 and other radionuclides that came to Earth and entered the food chain during the time of the nuclear weapons testing in the Northern Hemisphere. And I wrote a book about this called Wings of Death, which was financed by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. And round about that time I had a letter published in the British Medical Journal which drew attention to the increases in cancer in Wales, where the fallout was twice as much as the fallout in England due to the rainfall. Well, in 2023 we had a paper in the British Medical Journal, again British Medical Journal Oncology, by some Chinese epidemiologists who drew attention to the increase in cancer in young people. Cancer is normally an old person's disease because of the replication of cells. But this was now increases in cancer in young people. And someone allowed him to publish this. And of course everyone attacked him and said, oh no, it's a load of rubbish and there's no increase in cancer, it's just the aging population and so on. And I wrote in and I said, well look, I've done a pilot study of people in the United States in areas of high fallout and low fallout and compared the two. So if you look at the people's cancer death rates in the high fallout areas and you compare them with the people's death rates in the low fallout areas over the period of time following the 1960s when the fallout came down, you're able to show that there's a peak in the effect which occurs at the time of the peak fallout. So in other words, people born between 1955 and 65, from the study that I did, this was a pilot study, shows this effect, shows that those people have a 50% excess risk of cancer. Isn't that something? That identifies the cause of the cancer epidemic. That identifies the cause of the cancer in many of, or most of, a good proportion of the people that you know who died of cancer. So if they're lying in their deathbed or they're talking to you and they're saying, why did I get cancer? And the government will say, oh, because you drank too much alcohol, or you're too fat, or you this, or you that. The reality is that the government itself, the British government and the American government, sanctioned the detonation of enormous amounts of atomic bombs in the atmosphere, thermonuclear bombs in the atmosphere, which created these contaminants which got inside you through the food chain, through milk, through cheese, just through the air, through water, went into your body and increased the levels of concentrations of strontium-90, for example, which was measured in your bones, but also in your DNA, because strontium binds to DNA. And in 1963 some studies were done that showed this in Sweden, where they injected small amounts of strontium-90 into male mice and then mated them with female mice, and the fetuses all died in that situation. So we knew this, but nobody's done anything about it, and nobody's followed up the cause of cancer. But I've done that. So anyway, following this letter which I had published in the British Medical Journal in 2023, you can find it, in which I drew attention to this finding, this study that I did, I decided to do the study properly and do the statistics and focus on getting it pretty accurate. It gave the same answer, but the numbers were very slightly different. And now I'm going to publish it. But the trouble is, who reads scientific publications? Nobody does. So I want to present what I did to you guys, and so you can then spread it out and tell everybody that you know or that might be interested that the cause of their cancer is very likely exposure to the nuclear fallout, or the exposure of their mothers and fathers to the nuclear fallout, because this genetic damage carries down through the generations. All right, we're going to start by, I'm going to show you the first day neonatal mortality in the United States. All right, first day neonatal mortality represents genetic damage. Because these are children, these are babies in the womb who can't manage to survive once they come out of the womb. And you can see that peak at the bottom, the peak at the top is that's the falling of the levels of infant mortality. Those little dots are the infant mortality. This is United States. And the peaks underneath, that's the strontium-90 in milk. Okay? So you can see at the peak of the strontium-90 in milk, you had a peak in genetic damage in the children. Question is then, I asked myself, what happened to the children who didn't die? They presumably carried slightly less genetic damage, non-fatal genetic damage, if you like to say that, and that ought to have caused an increase in their cancer rate, because cancer is a genetic disease expressed at the cellular level. So if you have genetic damage, your probability of getting cancer is greater. So we need to then look at that. So how do we do it? What I did was I chose high fallout states of the United States and low fallout states of the United States. Here they are. It more or less goes at rainfall, but we know that these are high fallout and low fallout because the fallout was measured, and they measured it in the baby teeth and they measured it in children's bones and so on. So there's lots of data that backs up this choice. So you can see that in the southwest, where there's lots of rain and fallout, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, all those places, lots of rain, you get lots of fallout. And of course in the western parts where you have the cowboys and the dry deserts and so on and not much rain, you get no fallout, low fallout. There's about a 5-fold difference in the strontium-90 levels in California than there is, you know, in those low fallout areas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, compared with the Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi area. Okay, about a 5-fold difference in strontium-90. So then what we did was we get the data. I got the data from the Center for Disease Control. It's all online. You can get the cancer mortality. These are the rates of dead people. People died of cancer at different age groups. People who died at the age 15 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, all the way up to 55 to 64. You've got the death rates there. So many per thousand death rates. And you can then compare for each group of person, each age group, 34 to 45, 44 to 45 to 54, the 10-year age groups. You can compare those. You can divide the high fallout death rate by the low fallout death rate. And there's statistics that you can use to deal with this to see whether it's statistically significant and what the confidence intervals are and all of that stuff. Actually, that's not so straightforward, but I figured it all out eventually. So the results then show us, and these are the results with the confidence intervals. So what you have here is you have the relative risk is a number like 1.24 or 1.30, 1.50, and underneath it has two numbers which are the 95% confidence intervals. That is, it's unlikely to be less than this or more than that. Anyway, you don't need to worry too much about this one. I'm just holding it up so that you can see that those are the answers, and they're highly statistically significant. That is, they can't have occurred by chance. And of course we're talking about an enormous number of people, so the statistical significance is very, very high. We can then plot these not by age group, but by year of birth. Obviously somebody who's 54 to 65 in 2019 is going to be born at 55 to 64 years before 2019, you see. And so we can turn that into a year of birth thing, and this is the answer in terms of the period of birth. And so these are now relative risks as a percentage. This is percentage relative risk. So the other one was fractional, but so we just multiplied by 100. And you can see here that we've got right on the right hand side 55 to 64. 55 to 64, you can see about more than a 50% excess risk. In other words, at least 1/3 of all the people who died aged 55 to 64 in 2019, at least 1/3 of them, died because they were exposed to fallout. when they were born between 1955 and 1965. Isn't that just something? We can make this into a graph too. There it is. So what you have here is you have the relative risk of cancer, excess cancer, that's if you're in the high rainfall area relative to the low rainfall area, by cohort year of birth. So along the x-axis, along the baseline there, along here, see, you can see the year of birth of these people, and each different colour represents a different age group. But what you can see quite clearly is that all of the age groups appear to have a peak, except the very, very young ones, appear to have a peak in the period 1955 to 1965. And in the oldest ones of these, the peak is the highest. It's about 52%. So I have identified here the cause of the cancer epidemic. It's very simple. Very simple. So it's probable that all of you who have been touched by cancer have been touched by the long arm of the nuclear military complex and its antics in the 1950s, blowing up bombs in the atmosphere. There we are, simple. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I have some ideas, but I won't present them here. I've presented them in other videos, and I will present them in further videos as well. There's lots that we can do. And by the way, there's lots that we can do to cure cancer, because there are aspects of cancer which are not considered in the current cancer therapy world. So I'm going to talk about those as well. But that's enough for now. Be very angry about what's happened. Very angry. It's horrifying. We're talking about hundreds of millions of deaths. These are more deaths than occurred in all of the wars in history. And yet nobody knows. Professor Gofman, who was one of the earlier scientists working on the effects of radiation, the health effects of radiation, he said that he famously said that the nuclear industry is waging a war against humanity. And that's true. The Third World War that everyone's waiting for has happened. There's been a war of the nuclear industry against people, a war of the governments against their citizens. And nobody studies it, nobody looks at it. The governments will tell you why you've got cancer, of course. They'll say, you drank too much. Oh dear, too much whiskey. You're too fat. You're eating too much sugar. You're eating too much processed food. This and that. Nobody will tell you that you died because the government killed you. Thank you for listening.